Hi guys, Mike here from KS Bushcraft Down Under. So I've had some interesting feedback on the King's 150 piece toolkit. Now, bang for the buck, it's a good kit guys, it really is. So in my last video I compared my own personal tool rolls with what's in the King's, and there's a lot of crossover. Now this is a great starting platform, but if you're going to go remote with your four-wheel drive, you're going to need bits and pieces such as fuses, tire plugs and stuff like that. It's all those little bits and pieces that can really save the day. So I've been at this for about 40 years, so I've experienced most of the things that can go wrong with vehicles, and I have helped a lot of people out over the decades. So this is based on my experience and my personal preferences. So if you've got a Toyota or a vehicle like that that's got a huge dealer network and they've been around a long time, you can sort of draw on that experience from the mechanics out in the bush. Now chances are there wouldn't be a mechanical workshop in a small bush town that hasn't got a sealed set of filters for a Toyota, especially a Land Cruiser. Because they're in the mining industry, they're in the farming industry, but if you've got something exotic, you need to think more about air filters, fuel filters and stuff like that than someone who has a Toyota. But what we'll do, I'll go through and show you all the bits I would add to this basic toolkit so you can go remote touring and not be stuck somewhere waiting for an express parcel that could take 4 or 5 days or longer in the wet season to a remote part of Australia. So hopefully this gets you out of trouble and not into it. Right, first off the bat, out of the problems I've encountered all the years, tyres probably the most. Now tyre technology has improved hugely in the last 20 odd years, so not as many flat tyres as we used to have. Okay, now simple plug-in kit doesn't need to be the world's best. It's probably going to get you out of trouble most of the time. Now most flats that I've had, because I deflate and re-inflate my tyres often, is leaking valve cores. So a few spare dust caps and the tools to remove the valve core. So you can just get a simple stem jobby like this, or a tool like that, or a proper one like this one. I see that one's had a bit of hard use. So leaking valve cores common. I would recommend that you carry a couple of complete units like this, and if you do happen to tear off a valve stem, which is really rare, you've got one with you. So you can use that tool and a bit of paracord to put it in once you've demounted the tyre. So a super simple air compressor like this will re-inflate your tyre, take a while, if you have a flat tyre. Now this would be incredibly painful if you're deflating decent sized tyres down to 10 or 15 psi, so you won't do it. It's just, you make it too hard. So if you're going to go and manage your tyre pressures, which is the biggest thing for success out in remote travel on rough roads, is managing your tyre pressures, you're going to need a better compressor than one of these. So I normally have 2 compressors, so this is either a backup or I now have 2 blue tongue compressors. Right guys, the old bushcraft motto, when one is none, two is one. So I have 2 of these blue tongue compressors, one mounted in the back of my troop carrier and one portable. So the chances of both of these failing while I'm out on the trip, pretty much zero. These are incredibly reliable pumps. They were made in America, and they'll only go up to 50 psi, but they'll run all day long, which is a real bonus. So by combining both of these, I have the speed of like an ARB twin cylinder pump, which isn't that reliable, with the redundancy. Now I made up this cable decades ago, so I can super inflate one spare wheel and use that to decant into others. So a handy thing to have. Now you really need a reasonable tyre pressure gauge, because as I said, managing your tyre pressures is the secret to reliability. Changing a tyre, or wheel rim really. Nothing wrong with the screw factory jacks guys, these are brilliant, they're bulletproof. If you're going to carry one jack, just carry this, don't worry about a hydraulic jack. This is brutally reliable and designed for the vehicle. Now if you've lifted your suspension, got larger diameter wheels, check at home that everything works rather than finding out alongside the track. Now, the usual problem is you need somewhere firm to jack it up from, which is not a bush track. So I built this steel plate for my single burner gas stove. It does double duty as a base for my jack. Now, if you've got fancy alloy wheels and you don't want to scratch them up with the factory tool, get some sockets with a sleeve on them, or as I used to do with my Hilux, I had them wrapped in tape. So this one is 21 and 23. My new troop carrier, the wheel nuts are 22, which is about 7/8 of an inch. Go figure that out. Guys, just the last thing before we move on. If you've got something exotic in the way of tyres and rims, you may want to consider carrying a carcass. Because if you're up, say at the Mitchell Plateau, and you tear a tyre open, you've got one spare, that's fine. Hopefully it'll get you back to civilization. But you could be waiting a week to get something exotic up. If you've got something like these factory Toyota rims, you're going to find one of these in Kununurra or some small town. So give that some thought when you're going real remote. Guys, now what's not in the King's kit is some form of cutting device, as in the blade. So you can go, if you fancy yourself one of these multi-tools. Now this multi-tool costs more than that entire kit, so on the value stakes, not so good. But a basic blade, maybe something that's locking, such as this line lock here, that will do you a lot of camp tasks and double over. But if you're going camping, you're probably going to have a cutting device anyway. But some sort of utility knife that can cut. You may need to shorten the hose, or 1,000,001 task, cut something loose from underneath the vehicle, quite a common event. But you need a cutting tool. A cold chisel. Now I picked this one up at the thrift store, so I need to grind off that because it can hurt your hand and sharpen it. And a wire brush of some description. Now you can use a wood chisel, makes a fabulous gasket scraper, but you can use your blade of your knife in the push. So cold chisel, definitely a wood chisel's a bonus. Hi guys, after tyres, electrical gremlins are probably the most common thing, and it's normally in your accessory stuff that you or someone else has wired up. The factory stuff tends to be pretty bloody reliable. So if you're not an auto electrician, and vehicles these days are quite complicated, but you can track down a lot of gremlins with a basic test light. So that would be first off the bat. Here I've got a magnetic pickup for picking up odd things in the engine bay. This is a little alternator output meter, just measuring voltage. So you can check to see whether your alternator is charging or not, or your DC to DC charger for your fridge, if it's actually working or not. So you can diagnose whether it's the battery or it's the alternator. So this is the kebab skewer. Now on the 70 series V8s they have the alternator on the bottom of the motor and they get full of crud. So it's normally the bushings on the back, which are quite easy to get to on a 70 and a real brute on a 200, by the way. So get it off, clean it out, but you've got to hold the bushings back before you reinstall it around the armature. So this is what the kebab stick's for. So a handy thing out in the bush. Some pre-made cables, doesn't have to be huge, so that you can find out if there's a break in supply to something. You can see if it's the cable or the ends. So you can also chop that up to make splices. So here I've got a selection of blade fuses, Vehicle Pacific. Now you can buy blade fuses off eBay, and I'm not a huge fan of these little heat shrink tubes with a low melt solder inside, but for a bush repair it's a big step up from tying wires together and wrapping them with masking tape. So you might want to consider some of those. They're cheap as chips. Now as your skill level increases, a multimeter, so this multimeter would do away with the voltmeter and the test light. Keep it simple, that you don't require a 50-page instruction book. Really you want to test for voltage, test for a circuit. This little one here that I've had since the 1980s is ideal for that and ideal for most beginners. The digital ones can be so hard to read, and I've got to read the instruction book every time I pull them out. So keep it simple out the bush. We'll get on to nuts and bolts. So 1,000 k's of corrugations, if something's rattled loose, chances are you won't find it until the bolt's dropped off. So you can go out and buy a pre-made kit like this one here, which is an easy way of going, especially if you've got to split it between a few mates. Now that's handy. Basically, I decanted a selection of those for my remote kit. Now I've got 3 lengths of thread bar, so Toyota only uses 1 bolt diameter and 1 pitch size per thread. So these 3 sizes here would cover 90% of the smaller bolts on the truck. So with a selection of washers, nuts, captive, all the rest of it, I can make virtually anything as long as I've got access to a hacksaw and possibly a cordless drill to finish off the end, but I can do it with a file. We've got a file in our kit. So I've also got some diff plugs, some crush washers, filler plugs for the transfer case, and I've got a set of wheel studs. So because I've changed vehicles, I need to get some spare wheel nuts, but I've got a full set of wheel studs for the front and rear axle. This Land Cruiser's got the same ones front and rear, which is nice. Not all vehicles do. So there again, if you've got something exotic, a set of wheel studs is not a bad idea. So I've got a flat belt. Now this is from my previous Hilux. I need to find out if it's the same belt on this 2.8 Land Cruiser. It's the same engine, but not necessarily will they have the same belt. So that's something I need to check up on. Hoses. So you're not going to carry all the hoses for a vehicle unless you're carrying the old hoses, which are probably porous. That's why you changed them in the first place. So I've got a section of heater style hoses, and I've got barb joiners for them all. So often you can do a repair just by cutting the leak and pushing that in. So I've got enough joiners for fuel lines as well. But basically I can repair any hose I need to. So if you've got an older vehicle, it's a lot easier to do that at home than doing it on the side of the track, by the way. But good to have hoses and methods of joining them, even if you've only got the joiners and plenty of spare screw clamps. The constant tension clamps are one you use the pliers on. I used to think they were the cheapy option, but my mindset's now changed. I now think that they're better because as these things heat up and cool down, they lose their tension. But in the field, it's good to have them. So hose clamps. Now if you're going to go out and buy hose clamps, if you buy multiples of the same type, you can join 2 together to make a larger one. So rather than buying one big enough to fit the airbox, you could use two sizes for the radiator and join them together to make one larger one, rather than carrying something that you'll never use. But for me, after 40 odd years, I've collected a lot of clamps of different sizes. So some of them might fit to the hoses, so they're there ready to roll on the right size hose, but good to have. Right, getting down to the wire now, guys. So I've got some metal strapping here with pre-drilled. So if you've got to make something in the field, I can. I've got heavy wire, a bit like coat hanger wire. If you need to tie something up, so multiple sizes of wire is great. I've got regular cable ties. Now the white ones aren't UV stable, but you won't be caring about that at the side of the road. And these ones here are metal ones. They're a bit harder to use, but they can handle the heat. So it's good to have that option with you. Right guys, duct tape, thread tape, SOS emergency tape. So this stuff is self-fusing. It's brilliant for repair and leak and radiator hoses. I've fused it on the convoluted tubing between an airbox and the intake, and it threw up a code on a, I think it was a Nissan anyway. The rubber exhaust hangers, my Land Cruiser doesn't use this style, but a lot of vehicles do, and as they get older they fail. Next thing you know, the exhaust is hanging down when you really don't want it. So if it's getting a bit long in the tooth, I'd change these at home, but I've helped a lot of people out over the years by carrying these. Fuel filters, I keep them in a little plastic ammo box, sealed up, because when you want them, and you want them clean. So buy good ones. You're going to buy them anyway, but buy good quality factory ones. Some way of transferring fluids. So a piece of hose, I've got this jiggle siphon. So I've got to decant from the car into a can, or into another vehicle. Some way of jump starting your vehicle. Now I've got these leads here, they're shock proofed. If you've got a diesel vehicle, you're going to need good ones. If you're going to buy a jump pack, you need to make sure it will do the job on a flat diesel, and most of them don't do what they're claimed. I have an Oz-Charge capacitor pack that will kick over a decent sized diesel, I know that, and that's what I tend to use these days. But a good set of jumper cables, whether you're jumping from another vehicle or your house battery from your fridge if you've got one, is really good insurance. Right guys, a reliable form of illumination when you're working on a car in the dark. So a headlamp or a little work light like this one here that's got a magnet on it, really useful. Righto guys, to round out our video today, some form of penetrine oil and some form of penetrant and lubricant. So I'll personally prefer this Lanox stuff because it's not really that toxic. And if you have UHF radios in your vehicle, the aerials always get knocked off. You know, every trip I've been on, someone's lost one. So the last thing you want to be doing is sort of feeding wires through bulkheads or trying to find a UHF antenna in a small town. So I've got this little magnetic ducky antenna. I've got both styles of connector for the UHFs, and that is a really valuable spare if you need that communication, guys. Anyway, if you like this type of content and it helps you do good things, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. They've all the best of it, Bunnings, don't they?